When was the last time you looked at the news and genuinely felt hopeful? Do you think that maybe keeping a 72-hour emergency kit might not really be a bad idea after all? And when you think of politics, is the first thing that comes to mind a sense of possibility, excitement, or is it dread, apathy, and a quiet loss of hope? Considering the current state of affairs, I wouldn't really blame you if you all had similar responses along the lines of dread and hopelessness. And don't get me wrong, it is not because you don't want to hope. It is not because you don't want change, that you do not want a better world. But maybe just the possibility of hoping, of seeking an alternative, might seem too distant to grasp. It reminds me of a time not so long ago, when this heavy weight sort of settled over all of us, all at once. The pandemic. Well, the pandemic was this peculiar kind of heavy. It felt that so much was happening around us, yet there was so little within our capacity to change or in our capacity to do. And that felt heavy. It was collectively this profound sense of powerlessness. For me, it was a bit more than that. As I grew older, I began understanding and seeing the world better, with greater clarity, and that clarity carried its own weight. The world was being reshaped, and so was I. In many ways, as a young, hopeful person, I wanted to bring about change. I was like the mediums through which I could act, organizations I could reach out to. However, beneath all of that, the sense of not truly being able to change much persisted. And the only way I can describe it is this particular kind of tension. This particular kind of tension of discovering yourself in a world that constantly reminds you how dangerous that discovery can be. A defining moment in grappling with this tension came on 17th October 2023, when the Supreme Court of India declined to legalize same-sex marriages, rather deferring the responsibility to the legislature of the country. At that time, it felt dystopian. How a decision taken miles and miles away could have such a pervasive impact on my life. It was difficult to reconcile how decisions such as these could be taken by those seemingly distant from the people whose lived realities and truths were going to be impacted by such a decision. It didn't help that the discourse around queer people at the time was heavily polarized, where narratives were stripped of empathy, where they forgot that at the center of these debates were real people with real lives and real experiences, and not some abstractions that could be dissected over a 9 o'clock show for TRP. But more than that, it was a return back to this question. Was there a possibility of hope? Hope that was not rooted in idealistic visions and fictions of utopia, but rather built on the foundation for positive change and a better tomorrow. Well, I didn't think so. I said, no, not at all. Because I was caught in this endless cycle of critique. And the thing about critique is, it's quite endless. And it does create this disillusion that nothing much is possible, that everything seems quite doomed. And so, while critique is important and essential, it cannot be our endpoint. It is important that we move beyond and try to forge some alternative pathways to see what could be better than what is currently. And it is between the space between critique and creation that hope is present, and prefigurative politics emerges. Because prefigurative politics asks not only what we choose to resist, rather it asks us what do we choose to build instead. And so, in the next few minutes, I present to you the idea of prefigurative politics, what it means and what does it require of you. At its core, prefigurative politics is asking us to build here and now those social relationships and values that we hope to build for our future selves. It insists that the means and the ends cannot be separated. Prefiguration was coined in the late 70s as a term. And what it basically meant was these newly created structures and social relationships and processes must prefigure the desired end, ensuring that there's this strong cohesion between the means and the ends. Because at the heart of it, what prefigurative politics is a simple but a demanding idea that the way you fight for change must already reflect the change you hope to see. Prefigurative politics thus establishes this correlation between the means and the ends, but it does more. It creates a bridge between the present and the future. Because the way we organize today shapes the world we create for tomorrow. So what happens then is the future is not something that we wait for, rather it is something that we keep practicing until we get there. For me, this was best encapsulated in a conversation I had with a friend of mine at one of the events that was organized by one of the local student groups of Amnesty International. During the event, she shared about her activism and she shared about the different actions that she undertook. And while she was speaking about it, she spoke about this balancing act that she carried out, where she spoke about using her voice and her relative privilege as a white cis woman in certain spaces, while at the same time giving a platform to those who are traditionally been maligned in these spaces: queer people, people of color, disabled people. And for me, that was significant because it is often in these spaces, spaces where social justice, equality, and liberty are ideals that are always idolized as these outcomes that we must strive towards. They sadly don't get adopted as the practices that we choose to get there. So, what prefigurative politics does is it asks us a critical question about our means and our methods. It asks us that if our methods rely on coercion, exclusion, and silencing, how can the outcome possibly be fair, just, and equal? Prefigurative politics, therefore, can be applied pretty much everywhere, whether it is in the institutions that you are a part of, at work, at school, even in your classrooms, but even in the home place. Because the home place was always seen as the site of domesticity. However, as the author Bell Hooks commonly said, this site of domesticity soon transitioned into a site of resistance, where it fostered a people in opposition to domination, where women gathered in such spaces, often congregating to perform tasks that were expected of them, sadly because we are situated in the system of patriarchy. However, not only did they congregate and just do the tasks that were expected of them, rather they met up. And not only did they meet up, but they showed each other care, solidarity, and showed each other love. Now that might seem quite little, but if you think about it, it is not. It is a lot more. Because at its core, what it does is it humanizes what a system of oppression has for so long objectified. What it does is a bit more than that. It creates this sort of resistance by showing care and love to those people who have been deemed undeserving by the systems of oppression that we are present within. So if you think about it, it is so much more. It is not only an act of resistance, it is an act and an attempt to do things differently from the way they're being done right now. So you can see prefigurative politics is quite a lot, but not just that. For example, I recently came across this queer collective, and what they did or what they were engaged in is this act of restoring. Now you may ask, what is restoring? Well, restoring is the act of deconstructing and remaking stories where dominant narratives are recast and reinterpreted. So what this queer collective did is they basically recast and reinterpreted what it meant to be queer. And by doing so, they de-associated themselves from all those tropes and narratives that often tied and associated being queer to having unhappy endings, being queer to being sad and lonely. They combated and challenged queer erasure. And in doing so, they did something really powerful. They performed a task of reimagination, a restorative practice, basically by using the present act of restoring to heal past wounds, while at the same time re-envision what an alternative future could look like. Now, that is really essential to understand, because what it shows, these examples, is that prefigurative politics can be performed at an individual level by you and me. And it can be performed by the choices that we make, the spaces that we choose to be a part of. And in doing that, we instill a sense of hope. Hope that is not grounded in fictitious utopias, but rather built on principles and practices that we are adopting today in the here and now. But I know a question can arise, a question amongst many of you. What's the point of this? Does it really make a difference if I, one little person in this huge population of 9 billion, approximate, chooses to be prefigurative when we're still located in systems of oppression that continue to oppress, subjugate, exclude? Well, the localized and individual actions that you take, the prefigurative politics that you perform individually, can be connected to the institutional changes, the mass mobilization, and the strategy that can be built on a larger picture. It is just one step further. In her article, Don't Just Do Something, Sit There, Contemplative Activism and Be Political as Prefigurative Politics, Suzanne Klein-Scharsberg basically addressed that, the effectiveness of small-scale prefigurative action in causing radical change. Because what she said and suggested is that you should not look at prefigurative politics performed at the individual level in isolation. Rather, you look at it in tandem with the larger picture, where prefigurative politics performed by you and me can engage and in some way connect to the larger mobilizations, the larger movements that are out there. And if you think about it, that makes a lot of sense, right? Well, the thing is, sometimes these systems seem immovable, but you must still understand what you can control, the agency you have, because you get to decide how you relate to one another, where you refuse cruelty and apathy, where you choose empathy and care. And while the mainstream media and the headlines that we see out there won't capture the power of that, that has the power to change people, to form communities. And these communities can put the foundational stone to bringing about institutional change and systemic transformation. Think about it, of all those grassroots movements around us. Needless to say, a lot of rights that you and I enjoy currently, rights that you and I are willing to go out on the streets to defend, were once considered to be impossibilities. Right to vote, right to bodily choice, which is considerably right now a bit fragile, one might say, right to bodily autonomy, and right to choose. These rights that were for so long considered to be impossible. Well, a couple of people, okay, maybe not a couple, a lot of people thought that that was something that they would like to resist. That was something that they would not want to accept. So they charted out an alternative, another possibility, another reality where those were not luxuries enjoyed by a few, but rights that we all enjoy. So you can see, it is possible and it can happen. When I think of prefigurative politics, therefore, I'm again reminded of the pandemic. Because yes, as I said at the beginning, the pandemic was bleak, yes, it was hopeless, and yes, we felt powerless. But at the same time, it was when communities came together, when communities decided to organize and stand up for one another, whether it was for migrant workers, whether it was for sex workers, whether it was for the trans community. They did not wait for assistance from above. They stood up for one another. They cared for each other. They empathized with each other's struggles, and they organized to create systems of care that sort of supported them. And that is essential to remember, the power these communities, the power these collectives had in bringing about the change rather than depending on systemic movements to help them. When you think about it, you soon realize that we get to choose how we treat one another, and dignity does not become something that is granted from above. It is something that we share with one another, where care replaces competition, where leadership is something that can be shared. And when you experience this kind of organizing, this kind of mobilizing, you no longer take the boring explanation that there is no alternative, because we clearly can see there is. So I would like to end with this thought. In the current reality that we are living, the world that we want, the world that we are fighting for, that world that sort of accepts us for who we are and celebrates our differences, might seem distant, might seem fragile. But what I need you to understand is that it is, because it is still being born and taking shape. And prefigurative politics asks us to protect it, to practice it, and to trust that living by our values and standing by our principles, no matter what, is not a distraction. Rather, it is the very engine that shall power this change and that shall power this movement. So, when the next time someone comes up to you and poses the question, is there this new world that you're waiting for, this new reality, this alternative tomorrow? I believe that we can very confidently answer, we were already building it. Thank you.
Someone you respect. Who do you see? Perhaps